On this week's program, we're tackling one of the most important and probably most misunderstood issues in the world today, that of the People's Republic of China. For many Americans, China appears in headlines mainly as a potential threat, often framed as a economic rival or potentially a military, technological, even an ideological adversary. We hear warnings about a new escalating Cold War, about growing tensions in the Pacific, even the possibility of a future conflict between the two nuclear powers, almost like it's an inevitable occurrence. Scary stuff, to be sure. But how much do ordinary Americans actually know about modern China beyond those headlines? How is China understood around the world outside of the United States? And what are the consequences if fear and the militarization that it drives becomes the dominant framework for the U.S.-China relationship? To dig into this crucial topic, we'll look at it through the lens of a new book. This is called China Changes Everything. It's a wonderful book, and we have with us the one of the authors and lead editor and contributor, Sara Flounders. Sara Flounders is an anti-imperialist political activist and author who has been committed to a socialist future for over 50 years. Sara is an associate member of Veterans for Peace, a contributing editor of the Workers' World newspaper, and a leader in several organizations to include the International Action Center, the United National Anti-War Coalition, UNAC, and the Sanctions Kill campaign. Very important work there. As she joins us from New Jersey. Thank you for joining us, Sara.
Well, thank you, Josh. I've been looking forward to this conversation.
All right. Well, it's great to talk to you. I'm really enjoying the book, China Changes Everything. It's an excellent primer on the subject, and I cannot recommend it enough. It's a great place to frame the conversation around today. I guess what I'd like to get into are some of the what the stakes are really in this U.S.-China relationship. Maybe some surprises, some myths, some contradictions. But I think most importantly, the things that Americans largely are not being told. I guess a good place to start is what inspired this anthology? Why this book and why now?
Well, the idea, we were meeting as a group here in the U.S. Called Friends of Socialist China. And there were lots of opinions on what to do, what to produce, what could be written. We were organizing webinars and some big events also. But we thought the one thing about producing a book is it opens a conversation for lots of people. It's very useful. There are all kinds of groups who are using this now as a book club, taking a couple of chapters at a time. As a matter of fact, Code Pink is doing that, a 4-month series, 12 different sessions, taking several chapters at a time and discussing. We wanted to produce a book that could easily also be an EPUB, and people could take it down and read it wherever. And we wanted to produce a book that you could pick up in a bookstore or at your library, or get it at a sharply reduced rate, which you can do on Instagram. Which you can do on Ingram Spark at a 60% rate. So how to produce something that was deeply discounted, that was available online. And each of the authors who contributed were really excited as to what else they could do. They made 3 to 5 minute little videos describing the thinking behind their particular chapter. And we've attached those videos to each of the books online. Of course, there was interest in China to see and read what people in the U.S. were saying and thinking about China. So There's now a Chinese translation, and out of that also came it's being translated into Arabic, Russian, French, and Spanish. So the what a whole number of different authors are dealing with on what's new in China and how it is changing the world, and a real contribution, and also breaking down the steady drumbeat of U.S. propaganda that this is a wildly repressive, dictatorship. Really looking at what it's meant for the average person in China. I think most of the authors have traveled to China in all different delegations over the years, peace and solidarity groups, or are Chinese Americans looking at it from the lens of here, and anti-war and anti-imperialist activists. So the starting point is saying that China is the century's biggest success story. It really rose from complete poverty to being the leading force in global change. And how did that happen? We could look at the targeted poverty alleviation program, lifting 800 million people out of really abject poverty and illiteracy and lack of health care and whatnot into a very prosperous country today where 90% of the population own their own homes, apartments, condos. It's really unheard of here. Or someone else was looking at China's solar panels and wind turbines and hydropower. And how is it that they're really leading the global effort in this? And it is lighting whole parts of Africa, too. It's no longer necessary to be on the grid. One solar panel changes what even every household can do. And of course, there's what it means in China, but what it means when China gives solar panels in a huge supply ships to Cuba in terms of solving their energy problems. Other folks looked at the high-speed rail and how these clean and quiet metro subways, which China has built literally thousands of miles of metro subway tracks, and they compared it to, the subways here in New York. It's almost an unfair comparison, where the subways are filthy and broken and really a home for those who don't have homes. And that's true. And what it means in China, where they're spectacularly beautiful. And every single subway stop has clean restrooms and, just safe and beautiful areas. And there are thousands and thousands of them. Every major city has its own. So anyway, all different folks were interested in different aspects. So it was no one big piece. It was folks taking a little bite here and there, and that's what makes an anthology interesting reading. So, and we're hearing from other book clubs. We're asking people to request it from their library or bookstore because things do travel by word of mouth. We don't have any advertising budget. That's zero. But we really believe in people power.
Yeah, no, and it's an amazing book. Some of the contributors include Professor Gerald Horn, Jacqueline Lukeman, Margaret Kimberly, KJ No, just to name a few. Yeah, so many contributors. I was going to ask, the book title, China Changes Everything, kind of a bold claim. And I was going to ask, what exactly is it that China is changing? But you just really covered, so much of it. Everything from being a world leader in poverty alleviation on a massive scale, the infrastructure development. You talk about the Belt and Road Initiative, some of these types of things. A foreign policy that's rooted in solidarity, as you mentioned. So a lot of critiques of U.S. narratives of China that we could get into. I guess, let me ask you this: what would you say is one part of modern China that Western audiences most consistently get wrong or misunderstand, or if there's one misconception to the typical sort of American that hears mainstream discourse about China that you could dispel a myth, what would that be?
I think the biggest image is that this is a really dour, repressive dictatorship. And there's just zero understanding here or coverage, even in the way in which China functions constitutionally or with elections or with how the role of the Communist Party functions in China, which from the very base, every step up, has to be elected by your peers. That makes a huge difference in terms of who is in office from top to bottom. But none of that would convey. Anyone who's been to China talks about the enthusiasm of the population and the friendliness, and just that the always having to watch your back, which is a fact of life here in the U.S. You know, I'm in New York City every day. You know, you can't be oblivious ever to your surroundings. Because there's a breakdown in society and there's a breakdown in human relations. And you see the opposite in China. It's extremely modern, but it's also very friendly. And people look out for each other. I mean, you can even be looking at a map and someone will come up to you and they'll turn on their translation and ask how they can help. And they'll be able to. Here I am thinking, oh, I don't speak a word of Chinese. Well, everyone knows on their phone how to immediately talk to me. That was exciting because it means that they're both technically connected, but in friendly, supportive ways. I got a kick out of that. I really did. Even to cross the street, you know, or in a supermarket, in a coffee shop. People are solicitous of each other all the time. Now, here that's described as everybody's always watching you. You're, you know, in a very ominous way. But no, how it really works out is people care about each other, and it's very much part of the culture now. That really impressed me. It really did. And I think there had been at that time, there were horror stories. The call internationally was the genocide in Palestine. The response from the US government was suddenly to declare that there was a genocide in Xinjiang, which is in the far west of China. Now, against the Uyghur people, who are Islamic and indigenous people to the region of Xinjiang. One of many, it's a very multinational part of China, autonomous region of China. But so we decided we would go there and see. And instead we found it as a thriving, very interesting, quickly modernizing, and you could go to even to small towns, to major cities, whether you're taking the metro or you're just talking to people on the street, or you're in a town where the family members are so excited that their children are already a higher educational level, and education is completely free. It's taken for granted. It was impossible for anyone to even understand that everyone here is born into and dies in debt with college loans, housing loans, car loans. I mean, we're just credit card. We live in debt, and people in China don't. That makes a big difference just in the daily stress of life. So we would sometimes mention that the impact of debt just to pay for education, and folks would look almost quizzically. You have to pay to go to the university? Shouldn't that be provided? You know. So anyway, those were it can be hard in China to explain the situation in the U.S., and it can be just as hard in the U.S. to explain what exists in China. Now, it's not perfect, and the one thing that China says again and again is we are not yet a fully socialist country. We're building towards socialism, that the major industries are nationalized, the things that produce the greatest wealth from natural resources and oil and gas and gold and raw earth minerals to banks, biggest source of profit. All these things are nationalized. Major industries are nationalized, but they're just also uh, literally hundreds of thousands, maybe in the millions, of small little businesses that are privately owned. And what China controls are its multi-billionaires, and they have certainly reined them in again and again, uh, and said this has got to be the resources of the whole people. And in every industry, there'll be members of the Communist Party, which has 100 million members now. It's really from the grassroots all the way up who watch and make sure that this industry, this corporation, is acting in the interests of the people. So there's private ownership, or 50% ownership from Western countries, but it exists as long as the workers accept it and the government feels it's a contribution. And if not, asked to leave. And China has also signed contracts, which other countries had not before that, that if you invest, put a factory down in China, you have to share the blueprints, the management, and if you leave, the factory stays. Now, look at how different that is from everything that happened in the Rust Belt today, where entire industries, they were just ripped up and transported to China or to Vietnam or to Mexico or around the world for cheap labor. And folks just left behind. There was no, you didn't own that plant, even if you worked there your whole life. So there's a different concept in China of having an ownership stake in your job and having a right to have a say, and that the capitalists can leave, but what you produced will stay and be owned by everyone.
Right. And I mean, you really touched on it. It really comes back to that I guess different ideological model rooted in socialism, a word that's been very considered very scary in U.S. discourse, a lot less so now with younger generations. But I think that's an important point. How does socialism, or at least the Chinese concept of socialism, how does it fill a void left by sort of Western imperialist capitalist systems? It really comes down to our conceptions of freedom, free to do what and free from what. And it seems like you yourself and your fellow contributors are really answering that question in explicit detail. I love how it's organized into different chapters. Was there anything in this particular anthology that surprised you?
One of the interesting things was China turning on lights around the world about the solar. That was kind of a unique contribution. There's a whole new development in China using what you could call avatar plants that glow in the dark. That seems fanciful, but it means that whole urban areas might not need streetlights if the plants glow at night.
Oh, okay.
I mean, it's kind of, I was captured by this, that you could light cities without electricity, and what that means, even in terms of greening and carbon and whatnot. And they just genetically engineered plants, taking a little bit of DNA from lightning bugs and from glowing mushrooms, and they've injected it into orchids and sunflowers and chrysanthemums, and really it's kind of interesting. Now, you could say that's fanciful, but it already exists, and they've developed whole platforms and had exhibitions of it and whatnot. So
it's a fascinating.
Right.
Wow. But Sarah, there's no way to make a profit from that. So how can that possibly be considered a success? Right.
And those are the areas where exactly, if you have a government that will subsidize all kinds of research here, unless it's going to make an immediate profit, the capitalists just are not interested. I mean, that means immediate this quarter. What's it going to benefit? Not what's it going to do in 5 or 10 years. So even in housing codes, more than 200 cities now in China, and it has to be part of the plans, are uh, uh, the concrete, and this means even highway overpasses and whatnot, are green, are covered in plants, and it absorbs both sun but sound in terms of noise and light pollution. And so that's a big, big deal. It changes sort of the landscape of cities, where 70% of China now is living in cities. This is no longer a peasant population. They're huge cities, 20 million people. How can they live in a way that, is really exciting for them and green and pleasant? And that is, if you cover buildings in all sorts of plants and ivy and hanging areas, and you cover highway overpasses and rail lines and whatnot in green, and that has to be legislated. It has to be part of architectural plans. So major cities now, this is now, you see it everywhere. And people expect it. They expect that their surroundings will be healthy and quiet. So Chinese cities are very quiet because both an incredible number of things, the buses, the cabs, and whatnot, are all electric. That means silent. You can be standing on a busy corner and not like just hear that din of noise.
Yeah, that very much changes what a large urban area is.
Right. And can look like it can really be green all around. And in years to come, it might glow at night and use very little electricity. This is part of really greening the planet. And how do we live into the future? Are we just going to burn the planet? And determinedly, we're going to use the oil and gas, and we have actually an administration today that is consciously sabotaging even solar and wind.
Yes.
It's so short-sighted, and not even in terms of profit for them, but
right. Yeah, I mean, China really does seem to be, in a sense, I guess, living the dream, a dream that we sort of used to promote, right? Upward mobility, life is improving with each generation, science and technology improving our lives, not just the lives of people here in our home communities, but exporting that model to the rest of the world. This used to be the way that the United States sort of talked about itself, going back to the Marshall Plan era and all of that.
That's such a good, right. That is there was a time, the 1950s, very hopeful here. Now, by the way, China emphasizes this again and again. We're building toward socialism. This is not utopia.
Right.
And there are more online chat groups that raise criticisms, small and large, that are part of also the culture in China. You always hear, oh, you can't criticize anything in China. Well, you could just read some of, you just hit the translate button. Folks air their grievances all the time. They expect them to be met or changes made, whether it's in management or how a decision is made or what else is needed, how to equalize between the countryside and the very modern cities, how to really bring that level up. But it happens because there's this whole online discussion, and there also are people who, it was a big thing years ago, the Peace Corps and all these programs that folks here volunteered for, and they wanted to combat, poverty here and around the world. Now in China, they've taken that to a whole new level. They've Part of the expanding deserts, the expanding Gobi Desert was creating sandstorms that even hit Beijing every year. For months, the level of sand and dust was so they've built what they call a green wall. It stretches 3,000 miles. Now, 3,000 miles is really New York to San Francisco. That's 3,000 miles. They have built a green wall, and it's about 50 miles wide, and it stretches all across the north of China, and it is blocking and bringing whole new sources of vegetation. That's pretty amazing, but it's planted overwhelmingly with volunteer labor.
I wonder, given this, bringing it back to the fact that obviously we're both Americans here in the U.S. I wonder how are the Chinese reacting to this this kind of frenzied American posture of war and conflict and seeing everything in adversarial terms, and obviously that's not a reflection of the American people. That's a chosen policy by our government and corporate elites. I sometimes worry that some of the nations that are targeted for for some of this imperial violence don't always have a full appreciation of just the degree of bloodlust that comes out of Washington. What do you think about how this sort of thing affects the Chinese mindset and reaction to U.S. foreign policy posturing?
Well, they're pretty determined to defend themselves, and they're acutely conscious that they did liberate China from imperialist looting. The U.S. Navy had a whole fleet of boats that went 1,000 miles up China's rivers, the Yangtze and Yellow River. U.S. Navy, all the cities along it. You just burn somebody's warehouse down, and every other warehouse will sign a contract. That's the way 150 years it worked, along with the coastal cities, of course, also. So the Chinese Revolution ended that. And so they take very seriously their own defense. They say, we have not invaded other countries. The U.S. has 800 military bases around the world, and they're acutely aware of the danger of that. There's 100 articles you can read about how China is threatening Taiwan, which is part of China, by U.S. agreement too, by world agreement, by United Nations agreement. So they're not threatening at all. They haven't attacked Taiwan, though. It's the U.S. that occupies Taiwan militarily. So there's all kinds of... they certainly don't in any way feel that the people here are supportive of this policy. And they are taking many steps to defend themselves. And I think we've all seen that even a country, 90 million in Iran, has developed the technology. There were 18 U.S. bases in Western Asia, and 16 now of them are inoperable. the whole Navy in Bahrain, and it's no longer usable, and that was because of Iranian drones. Now, a lot of those electronic parts come from China, and you can bet everything that Iran has, China also has, and more. And so they are absolutely planning. They know that the U.S. is targeting them from every side, and that U.S. bases surround China from every direction. And they want to destroy China. And they make that very, very clear. Can they do it? China's determined that they cannot and will not. I think that's a very strong feeling. And actually, I think that's a reality. Now, what that means is for the population here, people don't want another war. And they also recognize increasingly it's because war is profitable for this handful of capitalists. Their investments, it's the most profitable industry. the most profitable U.S. export. Now, by the way, the U.S. ability to sell its weapons around the world after it's clear that the Iron Dome doesn't work and the Patriot missiles don't work and the
Yes.
THAAD missiles don't work, you wonder who's going to buy it. And I think that's why Trump has said, well, now we need a military budget that's $1.5 trillion. Okay, the U.S. is going to buy its own equipment where our tax money will no longer go for school lunch programs, for daycare programs here.
Right. He came out and said it, didn't he?
He said, well, you don't need that stuff. We need to put everything into the military. That's not going to go down well with people. They'll find ways, just like folks on the Ford found ways of making their voice heard. And I think that's increasingly happening. And we should understand that resistance takes many forms, and it's worth supporting resistance everywhere, including here. And
Very well
young
said.
people here, they're looking at new possibilities, and I think we need to embrace that and recognize its validity. But really, wars are for profit, and by the way, it does take, and China discusses this, it's costly for them because they are still a developing country, and having to put money into missiles, even for their own defense, takes away from other areas. And so they're much more into developing their own economy and sharing it around the world. They're very excited about sharing it around the world.
You have done a lot to help to explain through the lens of the book China Changes Everything what a more peaceful and realistic U.S.-China policy could look like, right? Instead of this sort of goal of full spectrum dominance that the U.S. seems obsessed with. As you point out, we now know this is no longer a given. The cat is out of the bag. We've got disgruntled folks from red state farmers to the exploited labor power across the United States, to include military service members. Meanwhile, the model that you're sharing with us is it's about cooperation, it's about friendship, solidarity, which really should be our watchwords going into the mid 20th century, soon to be. Sarah, as we close out, where would you like people to look? Where can people find the book, and where can they follow your work?
Okay. First of all, there's a whole listing with the little videos of all different authors describing, why they chose their chapter. And that's on the International Action Center's website, IACenter, IACENTER.org. But the book you can pick up in Amazon or Apple Books or Barnes and Noble or Bookshop, or you can get it at that big 60% discount at Ingram Spark. Just put in China Changes Everything and it pops up at a reduced rate. Or you can download it at Bookshop or actually on website. I think the more and more around the world, it's understood that humans are innately cooperative, not ruthlessly competitive. Human society is built on cooperation. You couldn't even drive in traffic unless people understood the rules of red lights and green lights and speed limits and whatnot. And that can be true also in, we have a billionaire class, tiny and ruthless, that think that there are no rules to the road for them, and no conduct that they don't have no obligation to feed or house or take care of people. It's just all for them. And we can show that there's a different possibility that exists and that is thriving. It's thriving. When people cooperate, they actually are much richer in human terms, yes, but also in what they can do. So the idea in China Changes Everything is this is having a real impact globally. So anyway.
All right. Humans as inherently cooperative. That's a beautiful sentiment and a perfect place to close out. Thank you. That was Sara Flounders, author and editor of China Changes Everything, an anthology by social justice activists, journalists, and commentators. Sara Flounders, thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to talking with you next time.
Okay, wait, put on that recorder again. I should have said really to thank Veterans for Peace as a national organization that, because it's made up of those who were enlisted for war, has the most responsible voice, declaring determinately an alternative. So Veterans for Peace, I'm an associate member, but I just want to say has a real role to play and is respected everywhere for that role. So thank you to Veterans for Peace.
Thank you, Sara. Thank you for your solidarity. And thank you so much for being with us on the VFP Radio Hour.